Hello, everybody. Welcome to week, I guess, 7. This is our sort of third week talking about epistemology. This first lecture here, I'm just going to go through the readings that we had so far for this week. I might add a little bit more later for people to go through. And then move on to theories of justification, the structure of justification, and then through next week, we're going to start talking about theories of how we know about reality. All right, so these two chapters come from the a little book called Epistemology by Richard Feldman, which is a really great introduction to epistemology. The last week we read his chapter on skepticism, and that was it's a really nice introduction to skepticism. So basically, what's going on here is that Feldman is offering up what he thinks of as the standard view of knowledge that people generally hold to, and he's kind of trying to look to see what the consequences of the standard view are. I mean, in a sense, he's trying to defend the standard view, but really he's just trying to trace out all of the consequences that it might have. And the standard view really is just that people have knowledge, right? Knowledge is one of the things that we talk about all the time and attribute to one another. We think of people as making sensible judgments, having good opinions, making correct decisions on the basis of the knowledge that they have. It's a thing that we use, right? When we see other people as having certain states of being in certain states of knowledge, we use that understanding of those other people having states of knowledge to predict their behavior and to explain their behavior, right? I mean, if I saw my dog get up and walk over to his bowl, to eat, it's because I would think of him as knowing that there's food in the bowl, right? If your sibling got up to go to the refrigerator to get something to eat, it's because you could explain their behavior by saying that they knew that there was food in the refrigerator. I mean, these things are really simple and straightforward. And, insofar as we think of these things along these lines, it seems obvious that we know these things, right? And so the standard view takes it seriously that we know quite a lot, right? We know things about our immediate environment. We know things about our own internal states, our own thoughts or feelings. We know common sense stuff about the world, right? We know that, Los Angeles is part of California, that if you are in Los Angeles, then you are inside the United States, right? The contiguous United States. Sometimes, common sense facts that are surprising, like that Reno, Nevada is further west than Los Angeles. That's something that, it's a bit of trivia you might not have known. We know scientific facts, right? We often know things about science. We know that water is made of H2O. We've done experiments on it. We know the mental states of others, right? We know what other people desire, what other people believe, how other people are feeling when other people are in pain. We probably know things about the past and the future. We know mathematical facts, right? Conceptual truths, right? That all bachelors are unmarried, that maybe that cats are mammals. And we know things about morality, right? We know that things like, unjustifiably harming others is wrong. Right? That we know maybe things that happen, like really basic things, like that happiness is morally good in some way, right? In the future again, and then maybe we know some religious things. Now, there's all sorts of stuff in each of these categories that we know, and so basically the standard view, sort of the main, or one of the main claims that the standard view wants to hold, is that we know a large variety of things in each of these categories, right? We know a lot, we don't know everything, but it's sort of contrary to the skeptical view. The standard view says, look, like, no, let's take this seriously. We do know a good amount of stuff. Now, on how do we know a good amount of stuff? Well, the standard view takes it that there are a number of different ways or modes of which we come to have the knowledge that we have. Now, of course, the kind of main ones that we often think about immediately are going to be things like perception and sensation, right? I see how things are in the world and thereby come to know how those things that I've seen are. Memory, right? I can remember things. I can remember how I felt yesterday, what I ate for breakfast, what I saw yesterday, what someone told me yesterday. That brings up to testimony. Testimony is the sort of word of others. The things that other people say seems to be a mode by which we can come to learn things, right? I mean, that's basically how teaching works. You come to know things because people tell you them. And then maybe, you do some exercises or you go out and find out for yourself in the world. But first, like, how did you learn math? How did you learn that 2 + 2 = 4? Well, probably not by, doing it yourself first. You probably had to be told. And then eventually you came to recognize that, yeah, when I've got, 2 objects over here, 2 objects over there, I've got 4 objects. Introspection is a great potential source of knowledge for knowing about your own internal states or your internal thoughts, what you think. Reasoning seems to be a form of, a mode of ways of knowing things. We can come to reason from certain facts, right? That other facts follow, right? We can think, in science, we do this often all the time. In inductive reasoning, we move from a limited evidence space to a general claim, right? Up until now in physics, we've never seen anything go faster than the speed of light. And so we plausibly have this theory, it's actually part of Einstein's theory of relativity, that nothing can go faster than the speed of light, that the speed of light is the constant at which everything can maximally go. That's inference through, that's an inductive inference. We haven't seen anything go faster than that yet. So we can seemingly reasonably infer, reason to the belief that nothing is going to go faster than the speed of light. And finally, maybe something like rational insight. It's a hard way to. This is kind of like a form of intellectual intuition or something like that, right? Sometimes it seems hard to say that we're reasoning to the truth of something, but we can just kind of see that it's true. So think about maybe like your belief in a tautology, right? Here's a tautology: everything that's true is true. Well, okay, that's a true tautology. That's a true statement. How do you know it's true? Well, did you reason to its truth? No, you just kind of see that it's true, right? It's like just so obvious that it's got to be true. There's nothing, nothing left to look for. All right, so the standard view basically tries to say that we know a lot of different things, and we have a lot of different methods of knowing these things, and each of these things, we actually do know stuff, and we actually do come to know stuff on the basis of each of these methods. And these are, what we might think of as our primary sources of knowledge. All right, so now, in trying to further understand epistemology, we would ask certain kinds of questions about the standard view. We might ask certain kind of questions about the standard view in order to push the standard view, in order to come to really sort of help us determine whether or not the standard view is true. And, the first kind of question that we might ask is, under what conditions a person actually knows something to be true? And we'll come to this later, but, you got to think like, okay, look, clearly we do. I mean, if we're taking the standard view seriously, clearly we do know a bunch of things, and clearly there are all these methods for knowing things. So what are the conditions under which, what are the conditions someone has to meet in order for someone to actually know something? Like, what do they have to do, right? Um, Interestingly, it's actually hard to sort of nail down the specific conditions, but this is one of those things that philosophers try to do, right? We're trying, in a sense, to give a definition of the word knowledge. We're trying to, analyze the concept of knowledge into its component parts to figure out what we might think of as what are often called the necessary and sufficient conditions. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, the necessary and sufficient conditions are basically the kinds of things that would make up a good definition. What does that mean? Well, a necessary condition is going to be a condition that something has to meet for it to count as a state of knowledge, right? So, in order to be knowledge, a certain state has to be a state of blank. And then that blank would be some necessary condition, something that the state has to have, some property that the state has to have in order to count as knowledge. A sufficient condition, on the other hand, is the kind of condition that if a state has it, if a state is in that condition, if a state has that property, then that property is sufficient for the state to count as knowledge. And so what we're trying to do is give both necessary conditions and sufficient conditions that combine together to give us a perfect definition of knowledge. And we'll look at this in a second. Classically, philosophers have thought for knowledge, and we'll talk about this, that knowledge is, or sort of a good definition of knowledge is that to know something is to have a justified true belief. And what it is. So each of those conditions is a necessary condition, and then the idea is taken together that's sufficient for knowledge. So the idea is you need to have a belief, right? You need to think that something's true. You need to be justified in that belief, which means you need to have a good reason or be confident in some sense. The belief needs to be reasonable, and then the belief has to be true. You can't really believe, you can believe things that are false, but you can't know things that are false, right? That just doesn't make sense. And we'll get more into that in a second. All right, so if we think of knowledge as involving justified beliefs, there's a further interesting question that comes to, well, what does it take to be justified in holding a belief? What does it mean to be reasonable in your beliefs, or to be rational with respect to your beliefs, right? Is it just like not being a hypocrite, not believing, believing one thing and the opposite, right? Like not acting in ways that seem contrary to the ways that you believe. Well, it seems like there's got to be more than just that, right? There's got to be a lot going on in explaining what it is for someone to have good reasons for holding the beliefs that they do. All right. Now, there are a series of objections or challenges to the standard view, and as we've already seen one, basically, it's the skeptical view. The skeptical view basically thinks that that anyone that holds the standard view is, in a way, fooling themselves, that they're overconfident in thinking that they actually are justified in believing a lot of the things that they do believe. Right now, often the skeptic kind of has to appeal to certain outlandish possibilities, outlandish scenarios, like that we're dreaming, or that it's possible that we're brains in vats or part of some artificial reality. But there are also some, skeptical arguments that don't really rely on these hypotheses, right? Like, Hume's argument about induction doesn't seem that outlandish. And it gets us to, a really difficult thing. Like, it seems like we don't know anything we think we know about the future, if Hume is right. So it's an interesting question whether or not we actually have knowledge at all. I think if you followed all the way to the end of the skeptic lecture, I think most philosophers these days generally take skepticism about as like they take it seriously as a tool to kind of help us understand what's going on in epistemology, but they don't take it seriously in the sense that they think that we actually just lack most of the knowledge that we think that we have, or that we actually are in any kind of position to where we don't know anything about the external world. People take pretty seriously that we do really know a lot of the things that we know, one way or another. So skepticism is a good challenge, especially specific forms of skepticism are good challenges to the standard view. But generally speaking, I think global skepticism isn't as on the table as some people might want it to be. But it's an interesting and helpful kind of challenge for learning how to justify the standard view. Now, there's a naturalistic kind of view that also seems to count as a sort of challenge to the standard view in epistemology. And the naturalistic view basically wants to start from science and says that really we should be trying to answer the questions of whether or not we know things from a scientific standpoint, rather than from an epistemological standpoint, right? From a philosophical standpoint. The philosophical standpoint uses a certain methodology that has to do much more with, conceptual analysis, trying to actually think hard about problems with the notion of knowledge, with the notion of rationality, with the notion of justification, with the notion of belief. So the naturalistic view tries more really to take on the position of cognitive psychology, and tries to determine whether or not we know things on the basis of certain empirical results. In a way, this isn't necessarily terrible or a huge challenge for the standard view. The standard view and the naturalistic view can, in a way, go hand in hand, but you might think kind of that one supersedes the other, right? That one is more fundamental than the other, and if you're of that boat, you might think that really the standard view is kind of out. We should just be naturalists if you want to trust in science that much. This, maybe we'll talk more about this as things go on. And finally, there's a sort of relativistic challenge that comes to what it is to know things, and comes to the standard view. And the relativistic challenge is this: look, there's lots of other ways that people think that they know things, right? Reading the tea leaves, or getting direct messages from God, seeing signs in the stars, being able to read other people's minds, all kinds of things. People think that there are other ways to come to know things. And so it might be that, there are other modes of knowing, or that knowing is in some way more relative, right? Relative to different ways of knowing things, right? Sometimes people think that you come to know things on the basis of traditions. People disagree about this, and so it's hard to always come down on on one side or the other without seeming like one is being dogmatic here. You don't really want to seem dogmatic, but there is also something that's worth thinking about, like whether or not people are being reasonable in a certain sense when they are appealing to outlandish things like the knowledge that the aliens built the pyramids on the basis of watching too much sci-fi TV and the History Channel. But I mean, there is sort of an interesting position for the relativistic view to take, where there is a certain amount of reasonable disagreement about whether or not the standard view is too restrictive, right? And whether or not we actually ought to expand it and think like, well, oh yeah, maybe there's room for divine insight, right? Or some other form of less obviously kind of causal knowledge that people can have. All right, moving on to chapter 2 here. The traditional analysis of knowledge, that is sort of the traditional theory of what the word knowledge means, takes the standard view seriously. And that's what we're going to do here. We're going to take the standard view seriously as sort of getting knowledge kind of right, like that we have a lot of knowledge and that we know things in a slew of ways. And then now we're going to try and analyze the very like nature of knowledge. So what exactly is knowledge, right? Think this is basically what Socrates would do back in we read the Euthyphro dilemma and in all of Plato's dialogues, he has the character Socrates running around basically asking people for the natures of things, right? And what exactly is that? He's looking for, the underlying definition or the underlying like essence of the kind of thing that he's questioning, right? So in the Euthyphro dilemma, he was asking, or in the Euthyphro dialogue, he was asking, what is the nature of piety? What is the nature of being good in the sense of like, being good before the gods? And we thought of that in terms of like, what is it to be good morally? What is it for something to have moral value? Now here we can think, well, what is the nature of knowledge itself? What is it to know something? Like what makes something a bit of knowledge? One easy place to start in trying to think about this question is to take seriously the ways in which we use the word know, right? To know something. But there's lots of different ways in which we use the word know. And so it's kind of helpful to try and standardize the ways in which we use the word know so that we're not kind of working on 5 different projects at once. We're just working on one project. And so it's helpful, I think, to kind of get these on the table and then try and see if we can easily explain some of them away into one form. So here's different ways in which we use the word know. Sometimes we use the word know when we talk about knowing someone, right? I know, let's see, is there anybody in town? No. Oh, so like I know my dog, Joey. Sometimes you know who someone is, right? So I know who the president of the United States is. Sometimes you know whether something is the case, right? So take this, I know whether or not it's raining today. It's not, right? Sometimes you know when something's the case, right? I know when the election is going to take place. It's going to be the first Tuesday of November. Sometimes you know how something is done. That is, I know how to ride a bicycle or how to make an omelet. And then usually we know facts, right? Usually here's the form is this. Usually it's S knows that P, where that P is the thing that the person knows, the fact that the person knows. S knows that blah, right? So take me. Kyle knows that philosophy lectures sometimes like this can be boring. I hope that this one's not, but sometimes they get boring, especially when we're just digging into the early stuff in thinking about knowledge before we get to the more fun stuff like we had when we were talking about skepticism and brains and vats and wild out there possibilities. All right, so now it's possible that all knowledge is propositional knowledge. Now, what is propositional knowledge? Well, a proposition is basically that P, right? So let me write this up here. A proposition is anytime you've got a phrase that's like that P. So let's see, versions of that P. That 2 plus 2 equals 4. That's, 2 plus 2 equals 4 could be P. That's a that P, right? Someone could know that 2 plus 2 equals 4. Someone could know that Joey is a dog, right? People can know that, and then you put in some declarative statement afterwards, and that is basically a proposition. A proposition is the statement that is expressed by a declarative sentence. Now, knows that sentences report people what people know. They report the propositions that people know, the thing, the facts basically that people know. Propositions are attempts at sort of stating the facts. But there's an interesting question as to whether or not all knowledge is propositional, right? So, and here's why you might think that. Well, look at all of these versions of knows, right? The word knows. When you say the professor knows J.D. Salinger up here, or say Kyle knows Joey, it doesn't seem like that's saying anything like Kyle knows that Joey what, right? Like it's not stating any fact. It doesn't seem like it's stating any proposition. So what exactly is going on there? Is there a way to explain away these forms of knowing, like Kyle knows Joey, or Kyle knows who the president of the United States is, in terms that are more like Kyle knows some fact, Kyle knows some proposition? And the answer is, I think, yes. And here's why we might think that. So like, take this statement of knowing whether. The librarian knows whether there is a book by J.D. Salinger in the library. Well, we can understand the kind of content of that sentence, that knowing sentence, in this way, right? To know whether something is to know either that whatever that something is the case or isn't the case. And so we can really think of this sentence, the librarian knows whether there is a book by J.D. Salinger in the library, as expressing a sentence more like this. Either the librarian knows that there is a book by J.D. Salinger in the library, that P, or the librarian knows that there isn't a book by J.D. Salinger in the library, knows that not P, right? Basically, where that there is a book by J.D. Salinger in the library is the P, the proposition that we're filling in for the knows that here, right? All right, so that allows us to, in a certain way, analyze knowledge whether into knowledge that. So now we've got, an explanation. Whenever we see a sentence that says someone knows whether something, then we can explain that sentence in terms of whether or not someone knows that blah or blah. Seemingly, we can do the same thing for a few other kinds of statements, right? So knowing when, if we want to explain, I know when the election is going to happen. It's going to happen on the first Thursday of November. What exactly is going on there? Well, to know when can be analyzed in terms of knowing that something will happen at a time, right? So if we know when something happens, and then that translates into knowing that something's going to happen at a time, then we can say exactly what, when we say that someone knows when something's going to happen, we can say the other thing. So Kyle knows when the election is going to be means that Kyle knows that the election is going to happen at such and such a time, right? And that seems right. So now we've analyzed knowing when something happens into a form of propositional knowing that something is going to happen at a certain time. Finally, there's a form of or actually no, not finally. Here's two further things, right? So you might think here's a non-propositional form of knowledge. Joey doesn't know any math, right? Well, that seems right. I don't think that my dog knows any math. But what exactly is going on there when we're saying that he doesn't know any math? It's not of the form Joey doesn't know that math. That doesn't even make sense. What's going on? Well, when I say that Joey doesn't know any math, what I mean is something like this. Joey doesn't have any propositional knowledge of some facts about math. Now, basically what's going on here is I've changed knowing that, or knowing about math, into something else. It's into having knowledge about something. And this is basically a way of kind of massaging the language so that we don't have to try and explain knows math, right? In a way that we explain, that we talk about knowing that P, knowing that something is the case, knowing some fact. The last two, similarly, when we talk about knowing an individual, let's see, is that one on here? Yeah, no, it's not on here. No, so like Kyle knows Joey. We can talk about that one in terms of being acquainted with individuals. Knowing in that case is a different kind of knowledge in some sense. It's not really a kind of knowledge. It's not knowing some fact. It's simply being in a relationship to an individual. So that's how I know Joey, because I'm acquainted with Joey. And then finally, we've got knowing how, right? So Kyle knows how to ride a bicycle. Kyle knows how to cook an omelet. Knowing how can be defined away, kind of analyzed away in terms of when you know how to do something, basically that just means that you are able to do to do that thing. Yeah. So if or at the very least able to show someone how to do it, right? In a sense, maybe you know how it's done, but you aren't exactly able. I mean, that would be possible. Able in the sense that, like, able if everything was ideal. All right, so that kind of gets us to this position where when we're going to be talking about knowledge, we should be thinking about propositional knowledge, right? Propositional knowledge is the kind of knowledge that is known when we say that S knows that P, right? So basically, think this way, anytime we're talking about knowledge, try to get it into a position of this form. S knows that P, where basically S is the subject, and P is the proposition that is known. All right. What next? So when it comes to knowing things, we seem to know the facts. So what exactly is it to know a fact? What exactly does it take to have knowledge of the facts? Well, it seems, for the most part, people have thought that there's that there are these two conditions on knowledge, and this is relatively uncontroversial. There are two necessary conditions that kind of everybody accepts hold of knowledge. One is, in order for something to be knowledge, it has to be true, and you have to believe it. Now, truth, kind of, on the surface should be obvious, right? And we can see that from the fact that it's really weird to say that someone knows something that's false, right? So can you imagine saying that let's take somebody. Oh, let's take Donald Trump. Say Donald Trump knows that Thomas Jefferson was the first president of the United States. Well, that sounds crazy. Thomas Jefferson wasn't the first president of the United States. George Washington was. So it can't be that Donald Trump knows that Thomas Jefferson was the first president of the United States, because it wasn't the case, right? It's even weirder if you say it in this other way, right? If you say something like, Donald Trump knows that Thomas Jefferson was the president of the United States, and it wasn't the case that Thomas Jefferson was president of the United States, first president. That sounds even worse, right? if you involve the falsehood in the sentence that you're saying. It sounds really bad to say that someone knows something, but that it's false. Now, sometimes people, if you think really hard, you can come up with a counterexample to this idea and think like maybe sometimes people do say things that like say that they know things, even though those things turn out to be false. But like there's an interesting question as to whether or not they really know it. So here, take this story, right? You're reading a mystery story. All the clues presented right up to the last chapter indicated that the butler was guilty. You felt sure that the butler did it. You were surprised when it was revealed in the final scene that the accountant was guilty. And you finish the book. When you finish the book, you say, "I knew all along that the butler did it, but then it turned out that he didn't." Right? That sounds like something that somebody might say. But it's an interesting question as to whether or not they're saying it sort of right? I mean, when they say that they knew it all along, did they really mean that they knew it all along? I mean, I think what they mean there is that they were confident the whole time that the butler did it, and it turned out that he didn't, right? It's not that they actually knew that he had done it. So this kind of raises a little bit of a question. Sometimes when we speak loosely. We use language in a loose way. Now, in philosophy, one of the nice things about it, and one of the things that we really are try to pride ourselves in doing, is being strict in what it is that we mean when we say something. And in trying to be strict, we try to take ourselves literally. And what does that mean? So if you said, in this case, I knew it all along that the butler did it, but then it turned out that he didn't, are you using the literal sense of know there, right? When you say I knew it all along? I don't think that you are. I think in that case, you're using some kind of figurative sense of know, or you're just kind of, it's a way that people talk sometimes, and so you're just kind of going along with that way of talking, but you're not really saying what your words mean in a sense, right? You're getting across a point that you were confident that the butler did it. You're getting across that point, but you're saying it with words that are kind of false, right? This happens all the time. People use words that they don't really understand what they mean, and they use them incorrectly, but they get the point across all the time. This happens left and right? People literally, take all kinds of, like, here we go. The word literally, right? The word literally. People use the word literally to talk about figurative things all the time, right? It's a common mistake these days to use the word literally in the wrong way. We literally use the word in the wrong way all the time. So it still helps us get our point across, right? And so what we want to do here, and what we ought to try to do, is when we're doing philosophy, we gotta kind of get into the mode of thinking hyper literally, like like the exact meaning of these words, regardless of the kind of things that we can sometimes imply by the way we use the words, or things that we might, the points that we might want to get across using the words in different ways, right? All right, so as we've got it so far, there's one condition on knowledge, that in order to know something, it has to be true. Basically, the only things that you can know are the facts. You can't know any falsehoods. You can know that certain things are false, but you can't know anything that's false. So anything that you know has to be literally true. Second condition on knowledge: in order to know something, you have to believe it, right? You have to accept that it's true. It's not possible for you to know something if you've never thought about it, right? In a sense. You don't have to have thought about it explicitly. Like when you see something, you can know it, but that's just because you saw it, right? It's sort of caused in you the thought. But you can't, I don't know. Let's see. Let's think about something that is totally just out there, right? Let's think about the number of hairs on Aristotle's head. So with the moment that he died, Aristotle died at some point, and he had a certain number of hairs on his head the moment that he died. Do you know anything about that? Well, up until a second ago, you definitely didn't, because you'd never thought about it, right? You didn't have any beliefs about it whatsoever. And if you didn't have any beliefs about that at all whatsoever, you definitely didn't know anything about it until you started forming beliefs. Now, probably a good thing that you haven't formed any beliefs about how many hairs were on Aristotle's head right when he died, because it's really hard to know how many hairs are on his head right when he died. And so, that brings up a good point as well. Believing is a kind of cognitive state that people are in when they, judge certain statements, certain propositions to be either true or false, or they decide not to judge a certain proposition. They suspend judgment as to whether or not they think the proposition is true or false, right? And so, with respect to the number of hairs on the head of Aristotle when he died, I think it's probably the best position is to suspend judgment, right? Because I have no idea how many hairs, right, would be on his head. Now, if somebody said, there were 801,000 hairs on Aristotle's head the moment that he died, well, that I think I'm safe in disbelieving, right? I think I should believe that it's not the case that Aristotle had 800,001 hairs on his head the moment that he died. Probably just because that's maybe that's a good guess, but I really doubt that it's correct. There's too many hairs. Like it could be higher, it could be lower. It's very unlikely that you got it spot on just by guessing like that, right? Good. All right, so in order to know things, you've got to both believe it, that is, like, think that it's true, accept that it's true, and it's got to be true, right? So in order to know something, first you have to believe that it's true, and then it's got to be true. What else? This is another counterexample. Some people say that you didn't. That sometimes here's another counterexample that where someone uses kind of loose knowledge, right? Somebody said, take your friend John, and it's like, do you believe that your name is John? And he says, I don't believe that my name is John. I know that my name is John, right? Well, he doesn't really mean that he doesn't believe that his name is John, right? What he means there is to say that he doesn't just believe that his name is John. He believes it so much and so closely and so strongly and has such good reasons for believing it that he knows it, right? He gets to say something stronger. In this case, it's almost like a version of the loose speech problem again, but it's a little bit different. It's that usually when it comes to saying things, if you say something weaker than what you could have said, people don't take you as seriously, right? So if you asked me how many kids I had, right, and I said 2 when I know that I have 3 kids. Well, what I'd said there is literally speaking true, right? If I have 3 kids, then I definitely have 2 kids. But it's like funny to say that I have 2 kids when I actually have 3 kids, right? Because there's something stronger that I can say. There's something more informative in a sense. I can say that I have 3 kids, and that tells you the maximum number of kids that I have, even though you didn't ask me what the maximum number of kids that I had is. You just asked how many kids, right? You said, how many kids do I have? And if I said 2, that's true, but it's not exactly, it's not exactly fully informative. All right. So now we've got to know something is to believe it and for it to be true. But is that it? Is that really all that we need in order to have knowledge of something? It seems not. And why not? Well, because it seems like we can present certain counterexamples to knowing something in virtue of just having a true belief about it. And here's what we mean. we're going to get into more, counterexample based philosophy now. And here's what happens in counterexample based philosophy. You offer up a definition. So in this case, we're giving the definition is if S knows that P is, by definition, S believes that P and P is true. Now, how do you give a counterexample? Well, either you show that you give a case where S knows that P, and S either doesn't believe P or P isn't true, or you do the other way around. You give a case in which S believes P and P is true, but intuitively S doesn't know that P, right? In the one case, we've given a case where we show that the definition is too strong, right? If S knows that P, but S doesn't believe P, then that would show that there are cases in which knowledge doesn't require believing. The other side, the other way of giving a counterexample is to show that the definition is too weak, right? So suppose S believes that P and P is true, but intuitively S doesn't know that P. Well, in that case, then the definition is too weak, and we need to add further conditions to 1 and 2 there, S believes that P and P is true, in order to capture what else is missing, right? So here's a counterexample to the definition of knowledge as just true belief. New York is playing Denver in the upcoming Super Bowl. The experts are divided about who will win, and the teams are rated as even. You have a hunch that Denver will win. When the game is finally played, your hunch turns out to have been correct, so you believe that Denver would win, and your belief is true. In this case, you believe Denver's going to win. It turns out to be true, but you didn't know that Denver would win, right? Intuitively, you just guessed, and it turned out to be correct. Now, what exactly is going on here? Well, it's not. This just goes to show that the true belief theory of knowledge isn't exactly right. You need something more than merely lucky guesses in order to count as knowing something. According to the true belief theory of knowledge, you did know that Denver would win. Why? Well, because you believed that Denver would win, and it was true that Denver won. So you did know. But that's bonkers, right? That can't be right. Denver, you didn't know. What was it that you were missing? Here's another case that shows what's going on. You have a picnic scheduled for Saturday. You hear a weather forecast that says the chances that it will rain on Saturday are slightly more than 50%. And you're a big pessimist. And so on the basis of the report, you believe that it will rain. And then when it does rain, you had the true belief that it would rain, right? Now, you did have a true belief here. And you might even say, I knew it would rain. But you didn't really know it, right? The reason you didn't know it is, in this case, it's not that you were guessing. You did have some evidence for your belief here, the weather report that you saw, but it's not simply, so yeah, you didn't simply guess, but the basis that you gave was not good enough. A weather report that's slightly over like 51% chance of rain isn't good enough to know that it will rain on that day. What you need to actually have knowledge on top of just your true belief is a good reason for believing. And 50% weather report is not a good enough reason. It's not reasonable enough for, you can maybe suspect that it will rain, you can expect that it will rain, but you're not going to know that it was going to rain. That's just your pessimism acting there. What you need to really know is justification, right? You need some good, reasonable basis, like a weather report that said like 99% chance of rain, right? That would be a good justification for believing that it would have that was going to rain. So what we need, and what the kind of traditional theory of knowledge basically ends up saying is, in order for S to know that S must believe that P must be true, and S must be justified in believing that P. That is, S must have some reason, some good reason for believing that P. All right. something, yeah, basically this theory goes all the way back to Socrates. Socrates believes it maybe in the Meno, and a lot of people have had this view. Now let's talk a little bit more about what these things are. So all of these conditions, belief, again, belief, disbelief, and suspension of belief, they're all kinds of attitudes that you take towards propositions. You believe that P, you disbelieve that P, where propositions are just declarative, basically declarative sentences state propositions. So any proposition is kind of anything that could be a fact if it were true, right? So example, that snow is white is a proposition. Another proposition is that snow is black. It's a false proposition, but it's a proposition, right? It could be true. If snow were different, then it could have been black. So things that aren't propositions are statements that are made like when you command someone to do something, like shut the door. That doesn't express a proposition, right? Because it's neither true nor false. You can't believe shut the door. Similarly, questions don't really express propositions, right? When I say, oh, what's your name? It's not that I believe that what's your name, right? It's not something that could be either true or false. Questions also don't express propositions. You can't believe questions. You can't believe commands. You can ask questions, and you can be inquisitive. That is, you can have a certain cognitive attitude that is questioning. Similarly, you can make you can tell people to do things. You can make statements and commands of action, but those things aren't related to beliefs. All right. Beliefs are related to truth. Why? Because basically the aim of all belief is to achieve the truth. You are trying as best you can to believe things that are true. Truth is central to the traditional account of knowledge. You need to believe true things in order to know them. And truth, at least for our purposes, can be captured by this correspondence theory of truth. The correspondence theory of truth says this: a proposition is true, that is, some statement is true, if and only if it corresponds to the facts. Basically, a proposition says how the world is, and a proposition is true if and only if there's a fact that corresponds to the way that the proposition says the world is, right? So if a proposition is that snow is white, then that proposition is true if it corresponds to the fact that snow is white. A proposition is false if and only if it fails to correspond to the facts. People use, philosophers especially, use this IFF construction here to mean if and only if. Usually, pretty much only philosophers and mathematicians use the IFF construction, but it's helpful to know. If and only if basically means it goes both ways, right? A proposition's true if it corresponds to the facts, and if a proposition corresponds to the facts, then it's true, right? Going one way, going the other. The idea here is really, really simple. Anytime you've got a fact, it makes any proposition that states that fact true. And anytime you've got a proposition that's true, it's because it corresponds to the fact. You can kind of think of facts as like states of the world, and propositions as like reflections, mirror images of states of the world. Or maybe like a photograph, right? Think of it like a photograph. A photograph tells you how the world is or was at a specific time, right? And the photograph is accurate if it actually corresponds to how the world is or was at that time. So, a false photograph is one that's been, messed with. It's been edited in some way. A true photograph, an accurate photograph, is one that accurately represents how things were at that time. Now, the correspondence theory of truth implies a few things, and I'm going to just sort of go through a couple of these. First, whether a proposition is true or false doesn't depend in any way on what anyone believes about that proposition, right? Um, belief doesn't affect truth in this way. When you believe things, you're trying to aim at the truth. You're trying to believe things that are true, but you can't make something true by believing it. Similarly, truth is not relative. It's not the case that things that are true for me but not true for you, or vice versa. When we're talking about truth here, we're talking about objective truth, real, honest to God, out there in the world things that are really true. Now, it's of course the case that some of us will believe and others of us will disbelieve the same thing. But surely, if there's an objective truth out there, then one of us is wrong, right? But this is just implies that it's possible to both believe things that are true and believe things that are false, and so it's possible to know things and to be mistaken about things that we think we know, right? You can believe something and be wrong about it. You can think that you know something and it can turn out to be false. That only really makes sense if there's an objective reality out there and that truth isn't relative to any single person. This, of course, doesn't legitimize dogmatism, right? Or any intolerant attitudes towards people that disagree with you. Just because there's a fact of the matter doesn't mean that you actually know it. You might be wrong. You got to back up your beliefs. So don't be intolerant, even though there's an objective fact of the matter. This also doesn't imply that things can't change, right? Statements like George Washington as president of the United States, they express different propositions at different times, right? So right now it expresses a false proposition. A true proposition would be George Washington was the president of the United States, right? That's true because it's got the past tense of is, it's got the was in there. Yeah. I think that's enough of what, definitely read through this, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Oh, finally, yeah, here's a good one. The correspondence theory of truth does not imply that we cannot know what is really true. Some people think like, oh, look, according to the correspondence theory of truth, truth is absolute, it's objective. And so what's true depends upon how things are in the objective world. And because the world is external to us, we can never really know what's true, right? All that we can really know is what's subjectively true inside of me, because all I really have access to is the stuff that's inside of me. This subjective truth depends upon my own views about the world, and so absolute truth must always be beyond our grasp. Now, this is kind of gets us towards skepticism, and some people legitimately believe this kind of stuff. But for now, really, the mere fact that what's true is dependent upon how the objective world is doesn't actually preclude us from knowing how the world is, from knowing the actual facts. It might be that the only way that we have access to the world is through our subjective experiences of the world, but that doesn't somehow mean that our subjective experiences aren't of the objective world and aren't related to the objective world in such a way that we can't know the objective world. So there's, we'll talk more about this, I think, in the next week. All right, finally, now we've got, in order to know something, you got to believe it. It's got to be true, and that means that the proposition that you believe has to correspond to some fact. And third and last, you've got to be justified. That is, the belief that you have has to be reasonable. You have to have some evidence or something like that for your belief. Justification comes in a sort of degrees, right? When you believe something, you either believe it or you disbelieve it, or you withhold judgment. But justification can be stronger or less strong, right? Sometimes you can have a better belief or better justification or worse justification for your belief. But you really do need to have justification and belief and have it be true. So here's an example of a case in which somebody has justification but doesn't believe, and so they don't know, right? Mr. Insecure has just taken an exam. The teacher quickly looked over his answers and said they looked good. and that the grades will be available the next day. Mr. Insecure studied hard, taken and done well on practice exams, found the questions on the exams similar to the ones he had studied, and so on. He has excellent reason to think that he passed the exam, but Mr. Insecure is insecure. He never believes that he has done well and does not believe that he has done well in this exam. Basically, he's just not confident, right? Insofar as he's not confident, though, even though he's not confident, he does have good reason for believing that he passed the exam. He's justified in this case, but because he doesn't actually come to believe, he's just not going to actually know, right? He doesn't know that he passed the exam because he doesn't believe it at all. Now, in this case, he has good justification, he has strong justification, but he lacks the belief in the truth, and so he lacks knowledge. Finally, the standard view in epistemology does allow us to give this kind of, shake on what we might think of as real knowledge versus apparent knowledge. And the idea with respect to real versus apparent knowledge is, as time goes by, people think that they know things that it turns out that they don't, right? People thought for a long time that the earth was flat. People thought for a long time that the earth was at the center of the universe. People thought for a long time, that lightning was, basically just Thor throwing down a spear, and because he was angry. Now, those things, people knew those things in a certain sense. They had what we might call now apparent knowledge. They were mistaken. Those things weren't really knowledge. The propositions that they believed were false. But we can talk as though they had knowledge in their terms sometimes in order to kind of get into their mode of thinking. And this, isn't precluded by the standard theory of knowledge. And sometimes it's really helpful and something that we need to actually take on, a position that we need to take on in order to help us understand other people's positions and so on, right? But here, what the way that things, really a helpful way of speaking is to say that they had apparent knowledge, apparent from their standpoint. From their standpoint, what they thought that they knew, they took themselves to know. But it wasn't real knowledge from our standpoint, knowing better. Their apparent knowledge didn't turn out to be real. All right, that's it for these two chapters for this week. Next up, we're going to be discussing the structure of knowledge and justification and different kinds of justification, in particular having to do with internalist and externalist forms of justification.